Hello, I'm going to talk to you about Module 9 case study. So first I will give a summary. James, a 15-year-old student at Rocket Junior High School, or junior high, was seen in the hallway giving something to David Ramos, a 13-year-old student, by a teacher. The teacher suspected it was drugs and reported the incident to the assistant principal, Richard Inman. James had a history of fighting, having poor grades, and being suspended and or expelled from school. David, on the other hand, was involved in school activities and was an honor roll student. Richard and the police officer called the two boys into Richard's office to see what had occurred. David admitted that James had given him brass knuckles, a prohibited weapon, on school grounds. As David was being handcuffed, James admitted that he had forced David to hold on to the brass knuckles until the end of the day. Both boys were handcuffed and taken down to jail. Due to the district's zero-tolerance policy, both boys should have been expelled, but given the situation, Richard felt that only James deserved this consequence. Richard received a call from the director of secondary education and was told that he needed to write up expulsion papers for David as well, or Richard would be written up, and that would be on his permanent record. Legal and ethical issues in this case. It is prohibited to have brass knuckles in school, which was committed by James and somewhat forcefully David as well. The district has a zero-tolerance policy, a 40-day expulsion to having weapons at school. Drugs or weapons require the support of an officer. Questioning the boys together puts David in an uncomfortable position, telling on a peer. David has a bright future and was bullied into the situation, and expulsion would affect this student greatly, especially living on the south side of town. And is expelling just one of the students fair or ethical? So if you just expel one, is that an ethical decision? Richard needs to decide if he is going to expel David for being bullied into holding on to the brass knuckles or get written up himself for not following the zero-tolerance policy. Facts. So people are known facts. Assistant Principal Richard Inman, this is his first year, and he is very personable with the students and has been working with James and his friends to make better choices and playing basketball with them and building a relationship. James is a 15-year-old student and known to be a troublemaker. David, who is 13, is part of the band on the honor roll and has no discipline violations. Then we have James and David's mothers, who had different reactions to the incident. James' mother felt that James should stay in jail for a little bit to try to learn his lesson, as where David's mother was very emotional and upset about David's being arrested. Then there was the school police officer. We know that was a school police officer, not a police officer. There are 900 students in the school. There's the teacher who witnessed the incident, and then there's the director of secondary education. We don't know about any of the other administrators or counselors. We don't know about any other students' involvement or witnesses or just other students in general. We don't know James' exact discipline history, but we do know that he's been in fights before. The school police officer's experience. Anything about the teacher who witnessed the incident, and we don't know anybody's race. Facts about the place. Some students are from the south side, which was very clear in the reading that would be a rough part of town to grow up in. We don't know for sure, but it's probably an urban or suburban district. We don't know what state. We don't know the demographics, or we don't know the socioeconomic status. Like I said, it is easy to assume that the socioeconomic status in this district is low, given the details in the reading. We know that it is a middle school, and they have programs like band and a winter concert, and that they have a zero-tolerance policy on weapons, and we can assume that it's public, but we don't know. In this situation, the decision could be damaging to the stakeholders. Richard could get written up, or this could affect David's academic future. David, James, and Richard have an important stake in the outcome. The superintendent has not been consulted to my knowledge. All other stakeholders have been informed, including the mothers of the two boys. I could learn more about the situation, but know enough to make a decision. So possible options: 1, no action is taken, so James is expelled and David is not. 2, James and David are both expelled for the 45 days. Richard gathers more evidence of David being innocent and brings it to the district. Richard resigns. David receives a shorter expulsion. All of these options, I'm assuming that David was suspended for a week before returning to school. Based on the reading, that's what it took him a week to return to school. I'm assuming it was for suspension. So no action, James is expelled and David is not. David's academic future is not thrown off the rails. James gets appropriate consequence, and Richard followed his ethics and values. The cons would be Richard does get written up. 2, James and David are both expelled for 45 days. The pros to this is Richard doesn't get written up. The district's zero tolerance policy is followed. James gets appropriate consequence. The cons are David receives a punishment harsher than what Richard believes he deserves. David's academic future is jeopardized, and Richard went against his own ethics and values. Richard gathered more evidence of David being innocent and brings it to the district. The pros to this is the board district agree with Richard and he doesn't get written up. David's academic future is not thrown off the rails. James gets his appropriate consequence. Richard followed his ethics and values. There are exceptions added to the zero tolerance policy for future incidents. Cons: the board does not agree with Richard and he is back at square one. Or the district does agree with Richard but can't persuade the director of secondary education, and Richard is still back at square one. Richard could resign and just not deal with making this decision. The pros is Richard won't get written up and can start fresh at another school. Maybe. It just kind of depends on references and stuff like that. James gets his appropriate consequence. Richard doesn't follow through with his ethics and values. That would be a con. And David will most likely be expelled, which will put his future academics in jeopardy. David receives a shorter expulsion. Pros: David's time away from school will be shorter. James receives the appropriate consequence. Richard doesn't get written up. Cons: David still had to be expelled and have that on his record. Richard doesn't fully follow his moral compass and his values, and this may not be allowed either, which would also put Richard back at square one. I believe option 3 is the best option. Richard gathers more evidence from teachers, students, and cameras in the school. Again, assuming that there are cameras, but if not, teachers and students. That David is more innocent than guilty in this situation. Richard goes to the school board and district and explains why he feels that David should be an exception to the zero tolerance policy. Richard would ask the district to take his side on the situation and speak to the director of secondary education to allow Richard to make the decision without getting written up. This would make sure all stakeholders are involved. Implementing this decision, Richard gathers more evidence. Richard goes to the school board and district and explains why David should not be expelled. The district agrees and speaks to the director of secondary education on his behalf. The director of secondary education agrees to not write Richard up for not expelling David. Richard learns to handle these situations a bit more slowly and gather all the information before getting too many stakeholders involved. If this path does not work, then Richard would resort to option 1, following his moral compass and taking the consequence for himself. So that would be that Richard does not expel David and is written up. And Richard is written up. My reflection through this assignment, I learned that as a future administrator, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have to clean up those mistakes if I'm going to do what is best for my students. My solutions for this case study required a lot more work than just simply expelling the student. But I have to do what is best for my students and put them first. Being written up is the last thing any employee or leader wants, but at the end of the day, it was the way the situation was handled that made the predicament. As a future administrator, I will stick to my values and ethics in order to put the majority first rather than just myself. Thank you for watching Module 9 Case Study.